Bashar al-Assad is now in the Russian capital, Moscow, where he has been granted asylum by Russian authorities. Russia was a staunch ally of Assad's during Syria's civil war and intervened militarily to keep him in power. Well, for more on this, we're joined now by Alexey Muraviev, who is an Associate Professor of National Security and Strategic Studies at Curtin University. He joins us from Busselton in Australia. Thank you very much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. First of all, as we mentioned, Assad and his family have been given asylum in Moscow. Can you just explain what value he still holds to Russia now, if any?
Well, I don't think it's about having any value. Obviously, he lost the political weight, the strategic weight. I think it's more about symbolism of how Putin effectively reacts to those who are personally loyal to him. And clearly, Assad was demonstrating personal loyalty to Putin over many years, including supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this is a signal to other Russia's clients and friends in the region, in the Gulf region, in the broader Middle East, as well as in Africa, in Asia, that as long as you remain loyal, we're not going to abandon you. We're not going to do what the Americans do in some places. We will look after you post factum. And so it's part of Russia's damage control, which obviously Moscow will have to now engage given the dramatic turnaround in Syria.
Yeah, before we get to that, can you just give us an idea of how far you think Putin will actually go to protect Assad? I mean, do you think that Assad could face any sort of justice at all?
Well, I think it would be, first of all, the first question would be whether he would remain permanently in Russia or whether being granted asylum in Russia it's almost like in transit, and Assad may relocate elsewhere. So that needs to be determined first. Secondly, it would very much up for negotiations, because at this point in time, I don't see that Putin will give him up unless it may become part of his bargaining agreement with the new government in Syria, which would then allow Russia to remain physically on the ground. So at the end of the day, Russia will look after its interests, not Assad.
OK. As you say, there are plenty of Russian strategic assets still within Syria. What happens now to those Russian bases and military installations?
Look, I mean, I don't think the Russians want to leave them anytime soon. They invested several billion rubles in modernizing this infrastructure. It's not about just having boots on the ground in Syria. It's about power projection. It's about influence, and not just across the Middle East, but also into Africa. So Russia will hold on to these facilities for as long as it can. They still have lease agreement, which was signed back in 2017, which would allow Russia to control those bases for 49 years, for as long as there is no proper government in place in Damascus. This agreement is likely to hold. The Russians, as far as I understand, are now in talks with different parts of Syrian opposition. Obviously, there would be forces with which they wouldn't be prepared to negotiate. But I think they will try to hold on to those bases. They're not going to be in a hurry to leave anytime soon. If anything, I can expect some reinforcements to be sent to it, also because Putin wouldn't want to see this being considered as a form of political defeat or strategic defeat, and then compared to U.S. abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan back in 2021.
We're just hearing that the opposition has full control over many of the provinces now along the coast. The armed forces of the opposition do not intend to storm any of the Russian military bases, and they are still operating normally at this stage. Just in regards to negotiations, I mean, will Moscow try and work alongside Jolani now and the other opposition forces? And will there be a negotiation of such? How do you see it playing out?
Look, I think the Russians will have no choice but to negotiate. I think they realize that they probably made a strategic mistake. As a result, command of Russian forces in Syria has been sacked days before. And has been replaced. The Russians have about 7,000 troops on the ground. So even if opposition will try to storm it, that would be a different story compared to try to take on elements of the Assad regime. We also need to remember that the Russians have been working with Syrian security services, with the Syrian military for quite some time. And I think if they choose, they can form elements of resistance, which I don't think they would probably want to do, because that would make them to take sides and not necessarily a winning side. But they will be prepared to work with opposition. Clearly, that's already been taking place. And the Russians also talking to principal sponsors of Syrian opposition forces. And that was the motive of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov meeting in Doha with representatives of Qatar and Turkey and the Iranians as well. So I think the Russians will engage many representatives of the very diverse force of opposition that was once united by toppling the Assad regime, but now will start kind of fighting for its own interests. Plus, the Russians want to keep their presence there under control, because one of the motives for them to moving into Syria in the first place was to reduce terrorism risks in Central Asia, in the former Soviet space, and in Russia itself. And for up until Crocus City Hall a terrorist attack, they've been quite successful about it.
Just on that, I mean, can you just give us an idea, some context around just how significant Syria is for Russia and how important it is for them to remain with a significant presence there?
Well, it is significant due to a number of reasons. First of all, it's geopolitics of pipeline. For as long as Russia controls at least part of Syria, it certainly has an upper hand in playing the geopolitics of pipelines across the Mediterranean, as well as in Europe, even though now the situation is different there. Russia's naval presence in Tartus allowed it to apply potential pressure on the Suez Canal in times of crisis. And it's a form of power projection across the Middle East and into Africa. So there is too much for Russia to lose. If Russia will have to withdraw from Syria, they will lose massive investments. They will also be playing the card of forgiving Syrian debt to the Soviet Union and to Russia under Assad. So I think they will try to negotiate or bring it into their negotiations with the new regime in Syria.
Okay.
So for Russia to lose presence in Syria, meaning their influence across the Middle East and Africa will be curtailed. So it's no option for Moscow.
Okay, fascinating to see how this all plays out. Thank you so much for your time and your insight into this. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.